Hello there, my name is Mia and I will be your aviation history teacher for the day. Today we will be covering a topic I see a lot of confusion online about regarding the SPO-15LM radar warning receiver on the MiG-29 912 for DCS World and its shortcomings. I will also cover why this might not be a problem for both the historical context and the systems, as well as for DCS. First, a little bit about the SPO-15LM Berioza or birch tree. The SPO-15LM radar warning receiver detects and alerts the pilots to centimeter band radio frequency emissions from potentially hostile fire control radars, enhancing situational awareness and defensive capability. The system collects, analyzes, and displays these threats. A very important thing to mention here is that the SPO-15 is not designed for fighters in the first place. It is designed for ground attack platforms that need to be aware of close-range threats, such as the Su-25 as well as the Su-22. Those aircraft do not have a radar which might be able to interfere with the operation of the SPO-15, but more on this later. Its display, which is just a bunch of light bulbs with amber and green covers, has the advantage of showing a large amount of information on the highest perceived threat with the highest priority, whilst lacking information for basically every single other one. See these small little green lights here? Yeah, those are your secondary threats. If this sounds interesting to you and you want to learn more about the SPO-15, I heavily encourage you to watch Area Gloria's video on the SPO-15, linked below. It goes into much more detail than I will here, and they know what they are talking about, and I cannot recommend their channel enough for everything Red 4, MiG-29 or Mi-24 related. To go over the problems that the SPO-15 has, you will need to understand some at least rough details that Area Gloria has covered in this video, specifically about how the different bands get picked up and processed. On the screen I'm showing you some graphs made by them for this information, so feel free to pause and read through this. What I will cover here is all the ways in which the SPO-15 has errors that might mess up the pilot's situational awareness, so let's start listing whatever the hell is wrong with the SPO-15. If the SPO-15 detects the F category, it will entirely ignore the X category of signals. A C and an X radar might, if they are in close azimuth to the plane, show as a P category. Pulse Doppler MPRF and HPRF radars will be shown as an X category at medium ranges. MPRF pulses can also become cluttered at longer ranges. If at closer ranges, a powerful radar can show up as coming from two different azimuths at the same time. And at longer ranges, above and below signals just will simply not work. Only at closer ranges, and maybe medium ranges, will they actually work. It's important to note here that at incredibly close ranges, one of the two antennas will almost always get a stronger signal and show as the one above or below. Important for notching, the side antennas for the 50 and 90 light will only work at incredibly close ranges. For example, at only 10 kilometers for an F-15, and radars like the Hornets sometimes don't even show up whatsoever. This is incredibly frustrating if you are used to notching by putting the enemy contact on your 90 degrees for the RWR. This will just not work whatsoever with the SPO-15. So let's go over the elephant in the room with the SPO-15. When the radar, the N019, is turned on, the SPO-15's frontal hemisphere will be entirely blocked off. So during normal Fox 1 BBR combat, you will not get any launch, lock, or any other warning from the front. So let's just get ready to use your good old eyes and put on your best prescription glasses, because you will have to just look outside for the contrails. Doesn't it just feel like the good old MiG-21 biz days again? The good news is, if you are fighting Fox 1s, the Sparrow has a huge smoking problem and smokes for at least 14 seconds, which is way more than enough to spot it usually. This might sound pretty detrimental to the plane's situational awareness and its ability to operate against 4th gen fighters, especially if you are coming from more Western digital RWRs. But this might not be the case, and I'm going to explain why for both historical purposes as well as the use case in DCS World. As mentioned before, the SPO-15 was meant to be fitted to ground attackers such as the Su-25 as well as the Su-22, where none of these problems actually mattered, but they were fitted to the MiG-29s, so why? Wouldn't this suck? Aren't the FA-18s with their fancy digital RWRs much better? Take a step back. Whilst, yes, I'm sure it would be a cool thing to have more information, it actually would not make much of a difference for Soviet air-to-air strategy. Let me explain. Soviet Air Doctrine was almost entirely defensively focused. The only purpose that the fighters served was to protect the citizens within the borders, do intercepts, and not to attack a country outside of them. The entire Soviet Union was littered with GCI radars, early warning stations, control towers, and AWACS planes. The entire border on both the east and the west was covered in radars. Soviet fighters had something called GCI Systems. These were systems such as the Lazur and the Raduga or the Beryuza, which connected closely to the aircraft systems. Let's take a look at the MiG-23 as an example. The pilot had this harmonica-looking thing right in front of them, which could display the range to the target assigned, the next maneuver the MiG pilot was about to perform, the heading towards the target, as well as a break-off command, a light to notify the pilot that the enemy was jamming, a light to notify that a new task was incoming, a light to begin a pop-up or a dive maneuver, and lastly, a light to notify the pilot to RTB and abort the mission. At the same time, the pilot was in constant voice contact with their GCI controller, getting information and commands. The plane's radar could automatically be slewed onto the target for the MiG-29 as well, to look at it before it even would come into view of the radar. It did notably not control the IRIS-T directly, however it did show the pilot on the IRIS-T display where roughly to look for the enemy. It is key to understand here that the entire battlefield in the air was controlled directly from the GCI controllers on the ground, and not the Soviet pilots piloting the individual aircraft. They were following the exact commands given to them by GCI, no matter what they were. The entire battlefield was under radar coverage, and for the very small, tiny gaps that might exist, an algorithm existed that the GCI controllers could access, which assessed where the enemy contact was likely heading during a radar outage. This was then corrected the second that the radar picked them back up again. The system was pretty advanced for the time and allowed an incredible amount of coordination and structure for the Soviet Air Force, not really seen anywhere else in the world. Now, why does this matter for the SPO-15? Let's think about this. If the pilot was 200 kilometers away from the enemy aircraft, but heading nose on, they would know exactly where the enemy was, even without the enemy being on radar due to GCI. The added situational awareness of the SPO-15, letting them know that there is a contact on the X-band at 12 o'clock, for example, would have simply been irrelevant. At closer ranges, maybe from 50 kilometers with the MiG's radar on, the SPO-15 would not notify the pilot to a launch, but the pilot would still know of the launch due to GCI letting them know the instant. If GCI then deems it to be too dangerous and recommends to turn cold or enter a crank, they could do so either over voice commands or with the steering cue. The pilot would be carried into safety without any annoying beep in their ear, which may or not even be faulty, and without having to assess what to do from the limited information that the SPO-15 would give them anyways. All of this was much more advanced if it was being done by GCI, and the pilots could rely entirely on them to do the assessment, the thinking, and give them the best solution for their problem. The key thing to take away here is that the pilots had almost no autonomy when it came to what maneuver and what decisions they should make. This was all done by GCI, and the SPO-15 would not influence this in any way, shape, or form. If you now fictionally replace the MiG-29's RWR with the most modern Hornet RWR and give them a display for it, and put them in the exact same situation as earlier, nothing would change. The added situational awareness might be cool for the pilot, but it would not change the flow of combat in any way, shape, or form. The way that the air-to-air confrontation plays out would remain the exact same if the pilot had the SPO-15 in their ear, the best possible RWR in their ear, or was blasting music at the highest volume. So again, the situational awareness came entirely from GCI. Now back to DCS, where as of recording, we sadly do not have GCI in the same way that the MiG-29 had it with either Lazur or Beryuza, and I still claim it does not matter much. Why is that? Because your combat flow should not be decided nor impacted by the RWR in any way, shape, or form. Let's take the Contention 80 server for this as an example, in a Fox 1 setting against an enemy Hornet carrying the AIM-7F Sparrow, whilst we are carrying the gorgeous R-27R. Depending on your personal profile to get up to BVR height and speed, you will be heading towards an enemy contact on the EWR at Mach 1.5 to 1.7 roughly. Using the TWF switch, I can give my missiles a little bit of extra time to prepare without locking the enemy immediately. At around 5 to 10 kilometers, I will lock the enemy, and when I enter max firing range, I can wait about 5 kilometers and then fire my R-27R, turning off to the side, cranking whilst flying towards my friendlies. I will then wait till the enemy starts to crank as well, switch my radar to pursuit mode and turn the co-op mode on. Now it's just a waiting game. I will either continue and hit the enemy with the R-27R, pull off to the side and continue to build up my speed again, or I will loose lock, turn away, and do the exact same. I also have the option to turn into the enemy if I notice that the enemy is shown as cold on the EWR and fire a R-73 or a second R-27R, but this highly depends. As you may have noticed, in not a single one of those steps, the SPO-15 would have made any difference whatsoever. I realize that this playing style might not appeal to every single person that flies PvP usually. A lot of people will show gameplay of getting 5 kills a sortie with really flashy R-73 kills, and those are amazing, don't get me wrong. I usually try to go between 1 to 2 kills a sortie and use as many missiles as it takes to kill one enemy, and then just land back safely. This BVR strategy allows you to operate incredibly safely whilst out of range of enemy missiles most of the time and slinging your missiles far away. My biggest point that I'm trying to make here is that the entire way that I react to the enemy is not based on a radar warning receiver, and honestly it's not even based on contrails. I will obviously look out for them, but it's not what actually matters. What does matter is my instincts and the timing. When I fly at an enemy and I am about to enter firing range, I know that the enemy will also likely be around firing range. If I now just shut my brain off and keep flying ahead, I will be dead because they will have fired at me around that range. Timing is the most powerful tool in PvP in the MiG-29, and understanding how enemies react to certain speed differences and to certain maneuvers that you might perform, for example starting the crank, the more kills you will get and the more that you will be able to reliably predict what the enemy is doing at the current moment, even without any other situational awareness tools. Arguments against the SPO-15 that I see a lot of the time and why people might be turned away from it is, for example, that they cannot tell when they are in an effective notch. And this is a reasonable argument to make, right? But if we are in a Fox 1 PvP setting, most of the time you are not going to be notching a missile. You are going to be cranking whilst guiding your missile and they are guiding theirs. It's important that you fire at a good range whilst flying higher and ideally faster than the enemy. This allows your missile the most potential it can possibly have, whilst ensuring that you can kill them before they can kill you. You really have no reliance on the RWR to know when someone will have shot at you, because you are used to when people shoot, and you will not have a reliance on having to notch with the RWR. You can see the contrail if you look out of your window because of how much the sparrows smoke, and you can align them with your 90 degrees very simply and easily. And on the other hand, you are able to just guide with the EWR for a notch, unless you just enter a crank anyways. A good RWR is not going to change how effective your BVR strategy is. What is going to affect this is how you launch your missiles. I have seen people shoot and hit 40 to 45 kilometer R-27R shots in a multiplayer PvP setting after losing the lock and then regaining it. This kind of insanity does not depend on RWR or no RWR. This just depends on knowing how your missiles work, how your plane works, and how they interact with one another. Let's say your R-27R misses, or that you have suspicion that it misses, but you are still both in a crank. What should you do? Ideally, if you are around 5 kilometers ahead of the NEZ, it's important to note here that the NEZ in the MiG-29 is incredibly underestimated, and you can easily add 5, maybe even sometimes 7 kilometers onto it. You should turn back in, fire your second R-27R, and re-enter the crank whilst guiding this one in. If you then get to the merge, you can select the R-73s, get visual contact by aligning the circle with your HUD, and mow them down with an R-73. And that is kind of it for this topic. I know that the SPO-15 is not the most advanced and not the most reliable tool in air-to-air combat, but I do hope that you find it interesting and that you can see how maybe not having an effective RWR is not as much of a detriment to your situational awareness as you maybe originally thought, and understand how the Soviet pilots dealt with this back in the day. I hope that we get GCI like this soon in DCS world, but I wouldn't hold my breath for now, although it is coming one day. I hope maybe one or two of you are motivated to try the full fidelity MiG-29 in DCS world now, and I heavily hope that you will enjoy it if you do. It is a fantastic aircraft, and I hope that this did not turn you away from it whatsoever.